The Colorado frontier of 1878 offered few second chances for women who didn't fit society's mold. Lydia Hartwell discovered this when her mail-order groom rejected her at the train station for being black, leaving her stranded with no money and nowhere to turn. Desperate, she accepted the only job available, caring for 5 orphaned children whose previous caretakers had all fled in terror. What she didn't know was that these weren't ordinary children, and their impossible abilities would either destroy them all or forge an unbreakable family. Lydia would have to choose between the life she'd always wanted and the children who needed her most. The flames licked at the barn walls like hungry tongues. Smoke filled Lydia's lungs as she held the leather satchel against her chest. 5 children pressed close behind her, their shallow breaths the only sound besides crackling wood. Sheriff Morrison stepped closer, his badge catching the firelight. His men flanked him, hands resting on their holsters. The barn door gaped, open behind them like a mouth waiting to swallow everything whole. "The maps, Mrs. Hartwell." Morrison's voice cut through the smoke. "Hand them over and the children stay together." Lydia's fingers tightened on the satchel. Inside lay Mary's drawings, maps of places that shouldn't exist, gold veins buried beneath Colorado soil, water sources that could save dying towns, passages through Apache territory that no white man had ever walked. 30 seconds, Morrison said. Then these freaks disappear into the system forever. The fire crept closer. Heat pressed against Lydia's back like a warning. She looked down at the satchel, then at the children's faces illuminated by the flames. Daniel's jaw set with determination. The twins held hands, their eyes reflecting the fire. Marcus stood protectively near Mary, who clutched her drawing pad like a shield. Lydia opened the satchel. She pulled out the maps, their edges yellowed, with age and mystery. Morrison's eyes gleamed with hunger. His men stepped forward. She dropped the maps into the flames. The paper curled and blackened. Morrison lunged forward, but the maps were already ash, carried away by the wind like secrets the earth refused to surrender. "You've made a mistake," Morrison growled. Lydia pulled the children closer. "No, I've made a choice." 6 weeks earlier, the Clearwater train station had been a different kind of hell. Lydia stepped onto the platform wearing her best dress, carrying her mother's suitcase and a letter from Thomas Wheeler promising marriage and a new life. The Colorado sun beat down, mercilessly turning the wooden platform into a furnace. Wheeler waited by the station house, tall, broad-shouldered, everything his letters had promised, until he saw her face. His expression shifted like clouds covering the sun. The promise in his eyes died. "You're not what I expected," he said. Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm Lydia Hartwell from your letters." "My letters were for a white woman." The words hit her like a physical blow. Around them, other passengers stared. Whispering began, spreading like wildfire through the small crowd. "I am who I said I was," Lydia said quietly. Wheeler shook his head. "You're a half-breed. I won't have mixed blood in my house." He turned and walked away. Lydia stood frozen on the platform, her suitcase heavy in her hand, her future crumbling like dried earth. The train whistle blew, announcing its departure back east. She had no money for a return ticket, no family to take her in, nothing but the clothes on her back and a dream that had just died in the Colorado dust. The Clearwater Children's Home squatted on the edge of town like a forgotten prayer. Mrs. Garrison, the church committee leader, led Lydia through its empty halls with the enthusiasm of someone showing off a coffin. 5 children, Mrs. Garrison said, her voice echoing off bare walls. Previous caretakers didn't last long. Something about the children being unnatural. They stopped outside a closed door. Sounds drifted through the wood. Mechanical whirring, whispered conversations, the scratch of pencil on paper. "What kind of unnatural?" Lydia asked. Mrs. Garrison's mouth tightened. "You'll see for yourself. The job pays room and board. Take it or leave it." Lydia had nowhere else to go. "I'll take it." The door opened to reveal a room that defied explanation. Mechanical contraptions covered every surface. Gears turned without visible power sources. A weather vane spun despite the stillness of the air. Maps covered the walls, drawn in a child's hand but accurate beyond anything Lydia had ever seen. Daniel looked up from his workbench, 12 years old with calloused hands and eyes too old for his face. "You're the new caretaker." "I'm Lydia." "They all have names," said Sarah, one of the twins. Her sister Emma nodded beside her, their movements synchronized like dancers. "They all leave." Marcus sat in the corner, whittling a piece of wood. At his feet lay a sleeping dog that hadn't been there when Lydia entered. The boy's fingers moved with impossible precision, creating shapes that seemed to shift and change as she watched. Mary sat by the window drawing. She didn't look up when Lydia entered, but her pencil moved faster, as if capturing something urgent and fleeting. "What are you drawing?" Lydia asked. Mary's pencil stopped. She looked up with eyes that held secrets deeper than mountain lakes. She didn't speak, but she turned the drawing pad around. Lydia's breath caught. The drawing showed the room they stood in, but from an angle that should have been impossible. Every detail was perfect, down to the grain in the wooden floor. But more than that, it showed Lydia herself, standing exactly where she was, with an expression of wonder that she hadn't realized was on her face. "How did you know I was coming?" Lydia whispered. Mary's eyes held hers for a long moment. Then she turned back to her drawing, her pencil moving across the paper like she was reading from a book only she could see. That night, Lydia lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Through the thin walls, she could hear Daniel's contraptions humming softly. The twins whispered to each other in voices too low to understand. Marcus moved through the halls like a ghost, checking on animals that appeared and disappeared like miracles. And Mary drew by moonlight, her pencil scratching against paper with the persistence of rain against a roof. Lydia closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new mysteries. But for the first time since stepping off that train, she felt something that might have been hope. The children needed her, and maybe, just maybe, she needed them too. The drought had lasted 3 weeks when Daniel's latest contraption began to hum. Lydia found him in the courtyard at dawn, adjusting copper wires on a device that looked like a compass crossed with a music box. The morning air hung still and expectant. "What does it do?" she asked. Daniel's hand stilled on the gears. "Finds water." The device spun once, twice, then pointed steadily toward the eastern hills. Daniel's face went pale. He started to dismantle the contraption with shaking fingers. "Don't." Lydia knelt beside him. "Show me." They walked together toward the hills, the device humming in Daniel's hands like a trapped bird. It led them to a patch of earth that looked no different from any other. Daniel set the device down. It spun faster, its hum rising to an almost musical note. "Dig here," Daniel whispered. Lydia found a shovel in the nearby tool shed. 3 feet, down. Water bubbled up from the earth, clear and cold. Daniel stared at the spring like it was something he'd summoned from a dream. "How long have you been able to do this?" "Since the fever took my parents." Daniel's voice was barely audible. "Since I woke up alone and everything metal started talking to me." Lydia reached out and touched his shoulder. The boy leaned into the contact like a plant bending toward sunlight. By evening, word of the spring had spread through Clearwater. Townspeople came in wagons and on foot, filling barrels and jugs. They looked at Daniel with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Children weren't supposed to find water where none existed. Children weren't supposed to make the impossible look easy. Sheriff Morrison arrived as the sun touched the horizon. He examined Daniel's device with careful hands, turning it over like he was reading a secret language. "Interesting piece of work," Morrison said. "Mind if I ask where you learned to build such things?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Just taught myself." Morrison's smile was thin as winter sunlight. Remarkable talent for someone so young. That night, Lydia found the twins standing on the porch, their faces turned toward the western sky. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but the air remained still. "Rain tomorrow," Sarah said. Heavy rain, Emma added. The weather glass says, clear skies for a week, Lydia observed. The twins looked at her with identical expressions of patient certainty. Rain tomorrow, they said in unison. The storm hit at noon the next day. Rain fell in sheets, turning the dusty streets into rivers of mud. Lydia found the twins in their room drawing pictures of the storm with colored pencils. Every detail matched what was happening outside their window. How do you know? Lydia asked. Sarah looked up from her drawing. The sky talks. Not with words, Emma added. With feelings. What does it feel like now? The twins exchanged a glance. Worried, Sarah said softly. About what? About the man who watches us, Emma whispered. Through the rain-streaked window, Lydia saw Morrison sitting in his wagon across the street. He'd been there for an hour, watching the house with the patience of a hunter. Marcus found her in the kitchen that evening, his hands gentle on a wounded sparrow. The bird's wing hung at an odd angle, but under the boy's touch it began to flutter normally. They're afraid of us, Marcus said without looking up. Who? Everyone. The sparrow flew from his hands to perch on the windowsill. The animals feel it too. Fear spreads like fire. Lydia watched the bird preen its feathers. What happened to your family? Marcus's hands stilled. Cholera took them. I survived because the animals warned me to stay away from the water. Nobody believed a 9-year-old boy could know what the horses were saying. But you did know. I've always known. Marcus's voice was heavy with exhaustion. Sometimes I wish I didn't. Mary remained the mystery. She drew constantly, her pencil moving across paper like she was tracing the lines of a world only she could see. Her drawings showed places that shouldn't exist but felt familiar. Underground chambers beneath the town, hidden passages through the mountains, caves filled with golden light. Lydia tried to speak with her, but Mary's silence was complete. The girl would look up from her drawings, study Lydia's face with ancient eyes, then return to her work. Sometimes she would tear out a page and hand it to Lydia. Always the drawings showed truth. A map of the house revealed a hidden room behind the kitchen wall. A sketch of the town square predicted exactly where the new well would be dug. A drawing of the cemetery showed graves that hadn't been dug yet, but would be before winter's end. The children tested Lydia in small ways. Daniel's contraptions would malfunction when she was watching, gears jamming and springs snapping. The twins would predict weather that didn't come, their eyes watching for signs of doubt. Marcus would claim the animals were saying things they weren't, testing whether she would believe or dismiss. But Lydia had learned to read the deeper currents. She saw how Daniel's devices only failed when he was nervous, how the twins' wrong predictions came when they were scared, how Marcus's false claims were really questions about trust. She began to respond not to what they said, but to what they needed. When Daniel's device jammed, she helped him fix it without asking why it broke. When the twins predicted sunny skies during a storm, she packed a picnic anyway. When Marcus claimed the horses were restless, she helped him calm them even though they seemed peaceful. Slowly, the tests stopped. The children began to trust. But the town's suspicion grew. Morrison visited twice more, asking careful questions about the children's backgrounds. Mrs. Garrison from the church committee made pointed comments about unnatural talents and the danger they posed to Christian souls. Thomas Wheeler appeared one evening as Lydia hung laundry behind the house. He stood at the fence line, hat in his hands, looking like a man who'd lost something valuable. I made a mistake, he said. Lydia continued pinning sheets to the line. The wind caught the fabric, snapping it like flags of surrender. You were right to walk away, Lydia replied. I want to make it right. Marry me. I'll provide for you and the children. Lydia's hand stilled on the clothespins. What changed? Your mind? Wheeler stepped closer to the fence. People talk about the children's abilities, about what they might be worth to the right buyer. The truth hit Lydia like cold water. Wheeler didn't want her. He wanted the children's gifts. She resumed hanging laundry, her movements deliberate. and calm. The children aren't for sale. Everything's for sale if the price is right. Lydia turned to face him. Not everything. Wheeler's expression hardened. You'll regret this. He walked away, his footsteps echoing in the evening air. Lydia watched him go, then looked up at the house. 5 faces peered down from the windows, having witnessed the entire exchange. That night, Mary approached Lydia's bed. She held out a drawing, her eyes wide with urgency. The picture showed the 5 children scattered like leaves in the wind. Empty beds, closed doors, silence where laughter used to live. Mary's lips moved, forming words she hadn't spoken in months. The maps in my head show us scattered like leaves. Lydia pulled the girl close, feeling the weight of prophecy in her small frame. We won't let that happen. But even as she spoke, Lydia wondered if promises were enough to hold back the storm that was coming. The church committee gathered like crows around Carrion. Lydia watched from the children's home window as they filed into the town hall, their black clothes stark against the morning dust. Mrs. Garrison led them, her spine rigid as a fence post. Daniel worked at his bench, his latest creation taking shape under careful hands. A communication device, he'd told her. Something to link them all when words weren't enough. The gears clicked with mechanical precision, but his fingers trembled. They're going to separate us, he said without looking up. Lydia moved away from the window. Not if I can help it. You can't fight the whole town. The twins sat by the cold fireplace, their hands moving in practiced synchronization as they wove grass into patterns. Their movements had grown more urgent over the past days, like they were trying to capture something that kept slipping away. 3 days, Sarah whispered. Maybe 4, Emma added. Until what? The twins looked up with identical expressions of sorrow. Until they come for us. Marcus appeared in the doorway, a wounded rabbit cradled in his arms. The animal's leg hung at an unnatural angle, but it rested peacefully against the boy's chest. The animals are leaving, Marcus said. Birds flying south even though it's not time. Rabbits heading for the deep woods. They know something's coming. Mary sat in her corner, drawing with fierce concentration. Her latest picture showed the town hall filled with angry faces, pointing fingers like accusations made flesh. At the center of the image, 5 small figures huddled together while shadows reached toward them with grasping hands. A knock echoed through the house. Lydia opened the door to find Mrs. Garrison standing on the porch, her face carved from winter stone. The committee has made its decision, Mrs. Garrison said. The children will be separated for their own good and the safety of the community. They're not dangerous. They're unnatural. That makes them dangerous by definition. Mrs. Garrison stepped inside without invitation. Her eyes swept over Daniel's contraptions, the twins' grass weavings, Marcus's collection of rescued animals. She paused at Mary's drawings, her expression shifting like clouds before a storm. When? Lydia asked. Tomorrow evening. Arrangements have been made with institutions across the territory. They'll be taken to places that can handle their particular conditions. After Mrs. Garrison left, Lydia found herself standing in the courtyard staring at the horizon. The sun hung low and red, painting the sky the color of dried blood. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed like a mourning cry. Thomas Wheeler emerged from the shadows near the barn. He'd been waiting, she realized, watching for his moment. Offer still stands, he said. I told you no. Wheeler stepped closer. The smell of whiskey clung to him like regret. Morrison made me a proposition. He gets the children's abilities. I get you and a cut of the profits. Lydia's blood turned to ice water. You're working with him. Always have been. Wheeler's smile was sharp as broken glass. Did you think your rejection at the train station was real? We needed someone desperate enough to get close to those freaks. Someone they'd trust. The pieces fell into place like dominoes toppling. The convenient job offer, the isolation of the children's home, the way Morrison always seemed to know exactly when to appear. You planned all of this. Every bit, except we didn't count on you actually caring about them. Wheeler's expression softened with something that might have been genuine regret. That's the problem we need to solve. Lydia backed toward the house. Are their children? Their weapons waiting to be used. Daniel's devices could revolutionize mining. The twins could predict weather for the railroads. Marcus could control livestock across the territory. And Mary's maps could open up lands that have been closed to white settlement for decades. You're talking about slavery. I'm talking about progress. Lydia reached the porch steps. Behind her, she could feel the children listening through the thin walls. Their silence was heavy with understanding. What's it going to be? Wheeler asked. Cooperation or force? Neither. Wheeler's hand moved toward his coat. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The barn door creaked open. Morrison stepped out with 2 deputies, their hands resting on their gun belts. They'd been waiting, too. The whole conversation had been theater, designed to give her the illusion of choice. Mrs. Hartwell, Morrison called. Step away from the house. Lydia remained on the porch. The children are under my protection. Not anymore. Inside the house, Daniel's communication device began to hum. The sound was barely audible, but Lydia felt it in her bones. The twins appeared at the window, their faces pressed against the glass. Marcus emerged from the barn's far side, moving like a shadow-given form. Animals began to gather around him. Dogs from town, horses from the nearby ranches, birds that should have flown south but hadn't. Mary stepped onto the porch beside Lydia. She held a drawing in her small hands. The picture showed this exact moment, but with one crucial difference. In Mary's drawing, Mrs. Garrison stood with them instead of against them. You're too late, Mary said softly, her first words in front of strangers since her parents died. Morrison frowned. Too late for what? A carriage approached from town. Mrs. Garrison sat in the driver's seat, but she wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit sat beside her, legal papers visible in his hands. I've changed my mind about the children, Mrs. Garrison announced as the carriage stopped. They'll be staying with their new legal guardian. She climbed down from the carriage with careful dignity. The man in the suit followed, his briefcase clutched like a shield. This is Mr. Hendricks from the Territorial Court, Mrs. Garrison said. He has adoption, papers signed by Judge Crawford himself. Morrison's face darkened. You can't do this. I can, and I have. Mrs. Garrison's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. These children deserve a chance at a real family. Wheeler stepped forward. The committee voted. The committee changed its vote. Unanimously. Mrs. Garrison met Wheeler's gaze without flinching. Seems several members had second thoughts about condemning children for gifts they didn't choose. Morrison's hand moved toward his gun. Those papers aren't worth the ink they're written with. Daniel's device hummed louder. The twins moved away from the window. Marcus whistled once, sharp and clear. Every animal within a mile radius began moving toward the children's home. Mary looked up at Lydia with eyes that held the weight of prophecy. Now we run. The communication device's hum became a wail. The twins began to speak in unison, their voices rising like an incantation. Marcus's whistle turned into something wild and primal. Animals converged from every direction, creating chaos in the gathering darkness. In the confusion, Lydia gathered the children close. Mrs. Garrison pressed a small bag into her hands. Money, Lydia realized. Enough to start over somewhere else. The barn, Mrs. Garrison whispered urgently. There's a wagon waiting behind it. They moved as one through the chaos of animals and shouting men. Daniel's device guided them like a beacon. The twins predicted every obstacle before they reached it. Marcus kept the animals between them and Morrison's deputies. Mary led them through paths that shouldn't have existed but did. Behind them, Morrison bellowed orders that no one could follow. The carefully laid trap had become a snare that caught the hunters instead of the prey. The barn door stood open like a promise. Inside, a wagon waited with fresh horses and supplies for a long journey. But as they reached the threshold, Lydia smelled smoke. The barn was already burning. The horses reared as flames consumed the wagon wheels. Smoke billowed through the barn like ghosts seeking revenge. Lydia pushed the children toward the back wall, away from the heat that pressed against them like angry hands. Daniel's communication device shrieked in harmony with the fire. The twins spoke in unison, their voices cutting through the chaos. Marcus whistled sharp commands that sent animals scattering into the night. Mary clutched her drawing pad, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Morrison's boots echoed on the barn floor behind them. His deputies flanked him, cutting off their escape route. The fire had been no accident. It was a cage made of heat and smoke. "End of the line," Morrison called over the crackling wood. Lydia felt the children press closer. Their combined breathing was shallow, urgent. The smoke thickened, making every breath a struggle. Daniel's device suddenly went silent. In the quiet between heartbeats, Lydia heard something new. Metal grinding against metal, gears turning in impossible directions. The boy was rebuilding his contraption even as the world burned around them. The twins began to move in perfect synchronization. Their hands wove patterns in the air, and the wind responded. Fresh air flowed through cracks in the barn walls, creating pockets of clarity in the smoke. Marcus whistled once, long and low. Every horse within 5 miles began to run toward the barn. Their hoofbeats drummed against the earth like thunder approaching. Mary looked up at Lydia. Her small hand reached out, pressing a folded paper into Lydia's palm. A map. Not of where they were, but of where they needed to go. "Now," Mary whispered. Daniel's rebuilt device erupted with sound. Not the mechanical hum from before, but something wilder. Steam pipes burst in the barn walls. Water cascaded down like indoor rain, turning fire to hissing steam. The twins raised their hands. Wind howled through the barn, carrying smoke up and out through the roof. Clear air rushed in to fill the void. Marcus's whistle became a song. Horses crashed through the barn side wall, their eyes wild with purpose. They came not to flee, but to fight. Morrison's deputies stumbled backward as horses filled the barn. The animals moved with impossible coordination, creating barriers between the family and their pursuers. Mary tugged on Lydia's dress. She pointed toward a section of the back wall where her map showed a hidden passage. Daniel's water had revealed loose boards, warped and ready to give way. They ran through the gap in the wall into the night air that tasted of freedom and fear. Behind them, Morrison shouted orders that no one could follow through the chaos of animals and steam. The landscape opened before them like a promise. Rolling hills stretched toward mountains that stood like ancient guardians against the star-filled sky. Mary's map showed a path through terrain that would hide their tracks and conceal their passage. They walked through the night. Daniel carried his rebuilt device, its soft humming providing comfort in the darkness. The twins predicted weather patterns hours ahead, guiding them away from storms and toward clear skies. Marcus communicated, with night creatures ensuring their path remained secret. Mary drew as they traveled, her pencil moving across paper by moonlight. Each drawing showed the next stage of their journey: a hidden valley, an abandoned homestead, a stream that would wash away their scent. By dawn, Clearwater was a memory painted in smoke and regret. 6 months later, they stood in a valley that maps had forgotten. Green grass grew beside a stream that sang with the voices of mountain springs. The abandoned homestead had become home under Lydia's patient hands. Daniel's workshop occupied the old stable. His contraptions served the valley now, finding water for gardens and generating power for the simple needs of their new life. The mechanical humming that had once frightened townspeople became the soundtrack of peace. The twins had grown into their gift. They predicted weather for the handful of other families who had found refuge in the hidden valley. Settlers with their own secrets, their own reasons for disappearing from the world's harsh judgment. Marcus tended animals that had followed them into exile, horses, dogs, even wild creatures that found safety in his presence. The valley thrived under his care, as if the land itself responded to his gentle touch. Mary spoke now. Not often, but when she did, her words carried the weight of prophecy made gentle. She drew maps of the future, showing Lydia where to plant crops, where to build new structures, where other lost souls would find their way to sanctuary. Lydia had built a school in the valley's heart. Children arrived periodically, brought by desperate parents or found wandering alone. Children with gifts that made them dangerous in the outside world but precious in this protected place. She stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching her first 5 students play in the afternoon sun. They moved with the confidence of children who had never been told their differences were wrong. Daniel helped younger students with their mechanical projects. The twins taught weather prediction like it was a game. Marcus showed new arrivals how to communicate with the valley's animals. Mary drew pictures for children who couldn't yet read, her maps showing them that they belonged somewhere. A letter arrived with the weekly supply run, forwarded from address to address, following a trail that had taken months to complete. Lydia recognized her sister's handwriting on the envelope. Inside, news from the world she'd left behind. Their mother was dying. The woman who had abandoned Lydia for being too dark, too different, too much of a reminder of choices made in shadows, wanted reconciliation. The letter outlined an inheritance. Money enough to live comfortably anywhere in the country. Property in respectable cities. Social position that would open doors previously closed. Everything Lydia had once believed she wanted. She read the letter aloud to the children during evening study time. They listened with the patience of people who had learned to trust her completely. When she finished, silence filled the schoolhouse like held breath. Daniel spoke first. "You could go back. You could have the life you planned," the twins added in unison. Marcus looked up from the wounded bird he was tending. "We'd understand." Mary approached with a drawing in her hands. Not a map this time, but a portrait. It showed Lydia as she was now, surrounded by children whose faces glowed with belonging. The woman in the picture looked nothing like the desperate bride who had stepped off a train in Clearwater. This woman's eyes held purpose instead of hope, strength instead of dreams. "You saved us," Mary said softly. "But we saved you too." Lydia folded the letter carefully. She walked to the stone fireplace that heated the schoolhouse, the same fireplace where she taught children that some things were worth protecting and others worth discarding. The flames welcomed the paper like an old friend. Lydia watched her sister's words curl and blacken, watched the promise of her old life turn to ash and smoke. She looked at the 5 faces that had taught her what family really meant. Children who had chosen her when the world rejected them both. A family forged, not by blood or law, but by the simple decision to care for each other when no one else would. The fire crackled in the growing darkness. Outside, the valley settled into night sounds, safe sounds, home sounds. The fire feels warmer when you burn the right things. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.